Hi there, my name's Kat Stern and I'm a behaviour consultant in secondary educational settings. You can find me at katstern.com. So this is a follow-up video from my previous state of behaviour video which looked at suspensions, and this one is going to shed a little bit more light on what we know is happening with behaviour in schools in England at the moment. So let's take a look. So those of you who've seen the previous video will recognise this graph. This was having a look at how suspensions have risen, and in actual fact that one was focused on 21-22, which was the highest suspension rate ever recorded. Now, prior to the pandemic, if you look at this area here on the graph, we had a range of about 4%, so from about 7% to about 11% was the secondary school suspension rate. And then post-pandemic, it really did kind of shoot up to around here about 14%. So what's interesting about that is that in July 2024 of this year, we will get the next data point from the Department for Education. So we're really looking at, in this video though, what is going to happen next. And actually, because there are people who have access to other data, we're going to have a look at an analysis that they've done to try and fill in the gaps. And actually, it's a very concerning picture. So let's take a look. So as this isn't my analysis, I'd like to take a moment to promote the creators, and they are FFT Education Data Lab. You can see their website there and their Twitter or X handle. They write fantastic blogs and they're able to do analysis of data sets that most of us don't have access to. So really, really useful website. I highly recommend them. So let's take a look at what they've done here. So there is a way that you can look at suspensions and permanent exclusions before the Department for Education releases it, and that is to look at something called E-codes. So an E-code is when a child is recorded as not being in school because they have been excluded, whether that is temporarily or whether that is permanently. And it is much easier to look at those, and we're much more up to date with those than we are with suspensions and exclusions. Every child gets on a typical day 2 codes in a day, so they'll get a code for the morning session and a code for the afternoon session. So is that as accurate as Department for Education data when it finally comes out? Well, FFT Data Lab have had a look at how accurate they are with this, and actually it is very close. So this is a very good predictor of what we're going to see in July of 2024. So let's have a look at the graph. So what we've got here, if you have a look on the y-axis, if I just pull up my little thing here. Okay, so on the y-axis, what we have is the percentage of sessions that were missed and were coded with the letter E, whether that's morning, whether that's afternoon. And what we have on the x-axis is the year group ranging from reception to year 11. So if we start by looking at the black dots that we have here, so that's the 21-22 data, just going to remind you that that was the year I just showed you on the graph, which had the highest ever recorded suspension rate across all schools. And what we have here, if you look at the green triangles, the green squares, at every year group, bar maybe reception, it is higher at every single level. Now that's obviously a big concern, and it does indicate that whilst we don't know whether this is due to permanent exclusion increasing or suspensions increasing, there definitely does look like there's going to be a significant increase. So what they've been able to do with this is actually go one step further, because this data is 22-23, and they managed to look at the autumn term of this current academic year. So let's take a look at that. So if you take a look at this graph here, this one is the autumn term of this current academic year. So it's extremely up-to-date information. And what we have here in the pink triangles is just the autumn term, pink squares. And you can see the autumn term data in comparison to the previous year is even higher yet again. And this is across all year groups, including reception. So the problem that we have clearly here is that suspensions and or permanent exclusions are continuing to rise, and yet this really is not going to be talked about significantly until July 2025. And that's far too long for us to wait to talk about how we are going to adapt to the worsening behaviour situation in our schools. It definitely is a worsening behaviour situation, because suspensions and permanent exclusions are only to be used where there are significant behaviour incidents. That's the guidance from the Department for Education. So we know they're rising, we know it's a persistent rise, and we know that every year it looks like we're going to beat all previous records in terms of the suspension rate, or at least the suspension and permanent exclusion rate. So this is a huge concern, and this is something that we need to be talking about a lot. There are people who have suggested that this is due to the pandemic. Some people suggest it's to do with the kind of byproduct of academization. There's a lot of theories floating around, but until we are having sensible and serious conversations about what is happening, whether it's the impact of austerity, the impact of the cost of living crisis, I bring those up because income correlates extremely well every single year to suspensions and to permanent exclusions and to academic attainment as well. So we know that there is some really kind of strong relationship there with school outcomes. Whatever it is, that we need to unpick it, and that we need to adapt, and that we certainly can't be waiting until the July data set that's actually almost 2 years out of date, when we can use this kind of data as produced by FFT to tell us what's really happening right now. The last thing I wanted to mention is that is this idea that we can suspend our way out of this difficulty, and suspensions are the way to kind of fix those behavioural issues that are increasing. If you've seen the previous video, you'll recognise this graph, and I used this graph to look at 10 individual secondary schools who had extremely high outlier levels of suspensions, and it was very clear from looking at these that extremely high suspension rates do not appear to create rapid improvement, and in fact it takes years for those suspension rates to come down, and sometimes they're still nowhere near national average. A reminder that in this graph, those black dots you see along the bottom of the x-axis, that's national average. So I'm also going to say, bearing in mind our suspension rates across the country, that there's no indication that increasing the number of suspensions in English schools will lead to a decrease in suspensions the following year, or the year after that, or the year after that. That's really not been the pattern at all. So I think we need to be wary about just assuming that if we are stricter with our sanctions, that this problem will go away. There is no evidence at a system-wide level to suggest that is the case. So hopefully there was a lot of food for thought in this video. I hope it was useful. I'm going to again thank FFT Data Lab for the analysis that they've done, which has formed the crux of this video. And please get in touch to extend this conversation, and let's raise it with as many people as possible. Okay, thank you. Hopefully see you in the next video.